At exactly 2:43 a.m., Sensor Array C detected something moving through the ventilation tunnels faster than a human being should have been able to run. I remember standing alone inside the control room while industrial fans thundered somewhere deep beneath the mountain. Hundreds of airflow monitors filled the screens. Pressure systems, oxygen sensors, thermal scanners. Everything looked normal, except for Array C. The motion tracker activated near tunnel marker 118, then marker 119, then 120, then 121. Each sensor sat nearly 80 feet apart. Whatever triggered them crossed the distance in less than a second. I immediately checked maintenance schedules. No crews underground. No inspection teams. No authorized personnel are anywhere near that section of the system. Yet the movement continued. One sensor after another. Deeper. Faster. Approaching the central ventilation shaft. Then it stopped. Every monitor returned to normal. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a new alert appeared. Unidentified transit completed. My stomach tightened. No ventilation software should generate that message. Then I noticed the timestamp attached to the event. Tomorrow. The movement hadn't happened yet. The maintenance radio crackled softly. Static filled the control room. Then a voice emerged. My voice. From. Exhausted. Terrified. Ethan, stop following it. Every monitor inside the facility flickered. The sensor network refreshed. A new status line appeared beneath Array C. Tracking observer confirmed. 3 nights earlier. My name is Ethan Cole, and by the time I accepted the overnight maintenance contract beneath Black Ridge Mountain, I had spent nearly a year looking for a place where I wouldn't have to think. Before arriving at the tunnel complex, I worked on large-scale infrastructure projects throughout several states. The work paid well, but everything changed after a collapse at a transit construction site where I served as a systems supervisor. Investigators eventually blamed structural defects that predated my involvement. Engineers signed reports. Lawyers settled claims. Officially, I wasn't responsible. Yet none of that mattered much to me. 3 workers died in a section of the tunnel I had inspected only days before the collapse. Every report divided responsibility among departments. Every memory focused it into a single moment. By the following year, I found myself accepting isolated contracts far away from cities and crowded offices. The ventilation facility beneath Black Ridge seemed perfect. Predictable systems. Minimal personnel. Long overnight shifts spent monitoring machinery instead of managing people. The complex existed deep beneath a mountain range hundreds of miles from the nearest major city. Massive ventilation tunnels stretched for miles through the rock, supplying air to transportation corridors, maintenance chambers, and emergency escape networks buried far below the surface. During daylight hours, technicians and engineers moved constantly through the facility. At night, however, the place transformed completely. Most personnel left before midnight. The endless tunnels became silent except for the distant roar of industrial fans forcing millions of cubic feet of air through concrete arteries carved into the mountain decades earlier. Standing inside the control center after dark felt strangely unreal. Hundreds of monitors tracked pressure systems, airflow rates, and motion sensors positioned throughout the tunnel network. The screens created the illusion of activity. Yet beyond the reinforced walls of the control room stretched miles of darkness where no one should have been. The supervisor responsible for training me was a veteran maintenance engineer named Robert Vance. Most of the orientation focused on ordinary procedures. Fan inspections. Sensor diagnostics. Emergency Protocols. Then Robert handed me a thin binder labeled Night Transit Procedures. The title sounded harmless enough. The contents did not. Never investigate isolated motion alerts after 2 a.m. Do not compare live transit events with archived tracking records. If sensor array C activates continuously, acknowledge the event but do not initiate a search. Most unusual of all was the final instruction printed across an entire page. If something appears to be moving between the sensors, stop observing immediately. Naturally, I assumed the rules existed because underground facilities develop strange traditions over time. Every isolated workplace collects stories. Robert didn't seem eager to discuss the details anyway. Whenever I asked about sensor array C, he redirected the conversation toward airflow systems or maintenance schedules. Only once did he hesitate. We were reviewing the sensor network when I noticed array C listed separately from every other motion tracking system inside the database. No installation records. No maintenance history. No equipment specifications. Just an active status indicator and a warning icon embedded throughout the monitoring software. Robert stared at the screen for several seconds before speaking. That array generates more transit reports than every other sensor system in the complex combined, he said quietly. Something about the wording bothered me immediately. Not errors. Not false alarms. Transit reports. The distinction felt deliberate. Before I could ask another question, he closed the monitoring system and moved on to another topic. My first night alone passed quietly enough. Industrial fans hummed deep beneath the mountain while airflow systems operated exactly as expected. Most of my shift involved reviewing archived maintenance records and monitoring pressure levels. Around 1 a.m., I started reading historical transit reports left behind by previous operators. Most documented ordinary events. Maintenance crews. Equipment inspections. Sensor faults. Then I found a report dated almost 4 years earlier. According to the file, sensor array C detected movement traveling through a section of tunnel that had not yet been excavated. Search teams found nothing. The tunnel itself didn't officially exist until 8 months later. Attached to the report was a handwritten note added in blue ink. Don't focus on what is moving. Focus on why it always knows the route. I remember reading the sentence twice. Then, glancing toward the monitor wall. For just a second, I thought one of the sensor indicators had changed position, and stopped moving the moment I looked directly at it. For the first few nights, the instructions surrounding sensor array C felt exactly like the kind of superstition that develops in isolated industrial facilities. Every underground operation accumulates stories. Mine workers talk about tunnels that seem longer at night. Utility crews swear certain maintenance corridors appear differently on old maps. Engineers spend enough overnight shifts staring at monitoring screens that eventually every unexplained alert becomes part of workplace folklore. Black Ridge seemed no different. My shifts settled into a predictable rhythm. Monitor airflow. Check pressure systems. Review maintenance schedules. Verify sensor diagnostics. Outside, thousands of tons of mountain stone sat motionless above the facility. Inside, enormous fans pushed air through miles of tunnels buried beneath the earth. After midnight, when most of the complex stood empty, the place felt strangely detached from reality. The machinery continued operating while time inside the control room seemed to slow. The sensor network quickly became familiar. Every motion array possessed installation records, maintenance logs, equipment specifications, and inspection histories. Every array except array C. According to the database, the system existed. The paperwork did not. No installation date. No engineering documentation. No calibration records. Yet the array remained active every night. At first, I assumed it represented some forgotten legacy equipment left behind during older tunnel expansions. The problem was simple. Array C never behaved like the other motion systems. Most sensors generated occasional false positives caused by temperature shifts, airflow disturbances, or equipment vibration. Array C generated transit events. Not detections. Not alerts. Transit events. The terminology remained consistent across decades of records. Curious, I began reviewing archived reports. Most documented movement travels through abandoned maintenance corridors. A few referenced sections of the tunnel that had not yet been excavated. Then I discovered reports describing routes that no longer existed. The first genuinely unusual event occurred during my fourth overnight shift. Around 2:38 a.m., Array C activated near tunnel marker 117. No maintenance crews were underground. No inspection teams were scheduled. No authorized personnel occupied that section of the network. Curious, I opened the transit log. A new entry appeared automatically. Unidentified movement. The event contained no thermal signature. No biometric data. No equipment identifier. Just movement. I opened archived reports. The same phrase appeared repeatedly. Unidentified movement. Again. And again. And again. The wording remained identical across decades of documentation. Nothing terrible happened immediately afterward. In fact, the following day felt unusually normal. Airflow systems behaved perfectly. Pressure levels remained stable. Sensor diagnostics reported no anomalies. By sunset, I had almost convinced myself the transit reports resulted from faulty equipment. Motion sensors fail constantly. Underground facilities produce interference. Human beings notice patterns where none exist. Every rational explanation sounded preferable to the alternatives. Looking back, that false confidence probably caused more damage than the detection itself. If something obvious had happened immediately, I might have stopped investigating. Instead, the silence encouraged me to continue. The first warning sign appeared during my next shift. I arrived shortly before midnight and discovered a transit report waiting inside the archive system. The document carried my employee identification number. My digital signature. According to the timestamp, I submitted it 12 days earlier. The problem was simple. I hadn't worked at Black Ridge 12 days earlier. Yet the report described current tunnel conditions perfectly. Airflow rates. Pressure levels. Equipment status. Everything matched reality. Most disturbing was the final observation attached to the bottom of the file. Array C has started adjusting its route. I stared at the sentence for nearly a minute. Then checked the archive. The report existed in multiple backups, multiple databases, multiple systems. As far as the facility records were concerned, I had written them. Around 2:43 a.m., the maintenance radio activated unexpectedly. Static crackled softly through the speaker mounted above the control desk. Then a voice emerged. My voice. Come. Professional. Exhausted. Ethan, stop tracking the route. The transmission lasted less than 3 seconds. No recording appeared afterward. No communication log existed. Nothing. Yet before I could process what I had heard, Array C activated again. Marker 118. Then 119. Then 120. The movement crossed hundreds of feet in seconds. No human being could have traveled that fast. Then the transit report expanded. Unlike every previous entry, this one contained a destination. The route endpoint field displayed a single line of text. Ethan Cole. Estimated arrival, 3 days. The rule I broke wasn't dramatic. I didn't disable the sensors. I didn't enter the tunnels alone. I didn't tamper with the monitoring systems. Instead, I violated a rule that felt strangely specific. Never compare live transit events with archived tracking records. The instruction seemed absurd. Diagnostics depend on comparison. Patterns matter. Historical data matters. If something was moving through the ventilation network, the logical response was to compare its route against previous detections. So when the transit report listed my name as the destination, curiosity overpowered caution. I opened the oldest archived reports and began matching the route against decades of recorded movement. At first, the events seemed unrelated. Different years. Different tunnel sections. Different operators. Then the pattern emerged. Every route eventually adjusted itself toward the person investigating it. Not immediately. Gradually. The more attention an operator paid to Array C, the more the movement altered its path. Some routes ended in abandoned corridors. Others terminated near maintenance stations. The longest investigations always ended the same way. The route eventually listed the operator as its destination. The realization arrived gradually. Not through one report. Through dozens. Every operator followed the same progression. Curiosity. Observation. Route analysis. Transit adjustment. Then something called route correlation appeared inside the records. No explanation accompanied the term. No definition. Just a status marker buried inside maintenance logs and transit reports. Curious, I searched the database for route correlation entries. Hundreds of results appeared. Most had been deleted. Others were heavily restricted. Yet one detail remained visible. Every correlated operator eventually appeared inside the route itself. Not as an observer. Not as a technician. As a destination. The wording disturbed me immediately because it implied movement in the wrong direction. Nothing terrible happened immediately afterward. In fact, the next 24 hours felt unusually normal. Airflow systems behaved perfectly. Pressure levels remained stable. No strange radio transmissions emerged from the communications network. By the following evening, I had almost convinced myself the database contained decades of corrupted records. Underground facilities preserve old errors forever. Human beings notice patterns where none exist. Every rational explanation sounded preferable to the alternatives. Looking back, that false confidence probably caused more damage than the comparison itself. If something obvious had happened immediately, I might have stopped investigating. Instead, the silence encouraged me to continue. The first warning sign appeared during my next shift. I arrived shortly before midnight and discovered a completed transit report waiting inside the archive system. The document described an unidentified movement event scheduled to occur 3 days later. According to the report, something would travel from the deepest section of the ventilation network directly toward the control center. The problem was simple. The event hadn't happened yet. More disturbing was the attached route map. The movement path crossed maintenance corridors, service tunnels, and access shafts before terminating at a specific location. My workstation. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Then checked the timestamp. 3 days from now. The transit event was scheduled to arrive 3 days from now. Around 2:43 a.m., the maintenance radio activated again. Static hissed softly through the control room. Then a voice emerged. My voice. Not frightened. Not urgent. Exhausted. Like someone who hadn't slept in years. Ethan, stop comparing the routes. The transmission paused briefly. Industrial fans rumbled somewhere deep beneath the mountain. The monitoring screens glowed softly across the dark room. Then the voice continued. It isn't changing direction. My chest tightened immediately. The speaker crackled softly. You are. The transmission ended. At that exact moment, Array C activated automatically. Marker 120. Then 121. Then 122. The movement crossed the tunnel network impossibly fast. Then the transit report expanded. Additional details appeared beneath the route information. For the first time, the system displayed estimated progress. Route correlation, 18% complete. And beneath it, a second line materialized. One that had not been there moments earlier. Destination status. Currently employed at Black Ridge Facility. I should have stopped comparing the routes after seeing the transit report terminate at my workstation. Every protocol, every warning, every archived file pointed toward the same conclusion. Array C wasn't something to investigate. It was something to avoid. Yet curiosity has a way of disguising itself as responsibility. Around 3 a.m., I reopened the Future Transit Report and began reviewing the route frame by frame. The movement path looked ordinary at first. Maintenance corridors, ventilation shafts, emergency access tunnels. Yet the details became stranger the longer I studied them. The route didn't follow the most direct path through the facility. Instead, it followed places connected to me. Corridors I used regularly. Junctions where I paused during inspections. Service passages near areas where I spent most of my shift. The route wasn't navigating the tunnel system. It was navigating familiarity. The realization unsettled me immediately because it suggested the movement wasn't heading toward a location. It was heading toward recognition. When I returned to routine monitoring, reality itself started feeling wrong. Transit reports began changing while I read them. Sensor logs updated in real time. Archived maintenance records referenced inspections that hadn't happened yet. Every anomaly seemed minor when viewed individually. Together, they created a disturbing pattern. The system wasn't forecasting future movement. It was documenting completed movement before it occurred. Around 1 a.m., an airflow report appeared predicting a pressure fluctuation inside Tunnel Sector 4. 38 minutes later, the fluctuation occurred exactly as described. Another report referenced a sensor failure scheduled for later that morning. The failure happened on time. Every report became reality. Not approximately. Precisely. The archive wasn't making predictions. It was recording outcomes before they happened. Then the radios started talking to each other. The first incident occurred shortly after midnight during a routine communications check. An inactive maintenance channel was activated unexpectedly. Moments later, another frequency responded. No authorized personnel occupied either network. Yet the conversation continued. At first, the voices were distorted beneath layers of static. Then I recognized them. Both speakers sounded like me. Not similar. Identical. One version discussed current sensor activity. The other described transit events are scheduled to occur days later. Listening to the exchange felt like overhearing two versions of myself comparing notes. Neither voice sounded surprised by the conversation. Neither questioned the impossible circumstances. They spoke like co-workers reviewing routine maintenance reports. Then one sentence emerged clearly through the interference. Correlation increased tonight. The other voice paused, then answered. He compared the routes. The transmission ended immediately afterward. No recording existed. No communication logs existed. Nothing. Yet I remembered every word. The final escalation arrived during a severe ventilation system test. Massive industrial fans are activated throughout the mountain, forcing enormous volumes of air through the tunnel network. The roar echoed through the facility continuously while pressure systems adjusted across dozens of sectors. Around 2:43 a.m., every monitor inside the control room refreshed simultaneously. Sensor feeds vanished. Airflow systems disappeared. Maintenance reports collapsed. For several seconds, the entire facility displayed nothing except Array C. Hundreds of versions of the same route filled every screen. Different years. Different operators. Different tunnel layouts. Every path looked familiar and impossible at the same time. Then I noticed something terrifying. Every route eventually led to the same destination. Not metaphorically. Literally. Different years. Different corridors. Different transit events. Every route terminated at Ethan Cole. My apartment. My childhood home. My previous workplace. Places connected to my life. The movement wasn't traveling somewhere. It was traveling toward someone. Then a new transit report appeared automatically. Timestamp. Active. Status. Destination observation. Subject. Ethan Cole. I opened it slowly. The report consisted of a single sentence. He finally realized the routes do not track movement. For several seconds, I stared at the screen. Then a second sentence appeared beneath it. Typed in real time. They track convergence. A third sentence followed immediately afterward. And this time, it wasn't describing me. It was describing something standing motionless at tunnel marker 122. According to the report, it had just looked directly at the nearest sensor. And for the first time since the tracking began, it had stopped moving. After the report described something standing motionless at tunnel marker 122 and looking directly into the nearest sensor, I stopped treating the transit events as equipment anomalies and started treating them as evidence. Every warning hidden inside the night transit procedures suddenly felt less like superstition and more like containment. Something had been happening beneath Black Ridge Mountain for decades, and every operator who noticed it left fragments behind. Around 1 a.m., I abandoned the monitoring systems and began searching through the oldest records stored inside the facility. Most personnel relied entirely on digital archives. Few remembered that the tunnel complex contained a physical records vault beneath the original ventilation control station. According to construction documents, the archive dated back to the earliest excavation phases nearly 70 years earlier. The access door required a mechanical key stored inside the supervisor's office. Industrial fans thundered through the mountain while I descended alone into the lower levels. The deeper sections felt ancient. Concrete walls disappeared beneath rusting conduit and abandoned wiring. Emergency lights flickered weakly above narrow corridors. The archive itself resembled a forgotten bunker. Thousands of maintenance reports filled steel cabinets stretching into darkness. Dust covered everything. Yet several drawers stood open as though someone had been reviewing the files recently. The earliest documents immediately revealed a pattern. Array C had existed before the tunnels. According to reports dating back decades, unidentified transit events were being documented during the excavation phase itself. Workers reported movement through tunnel sections that had not yet been dug. Survey teams tracked routes crossing solid rock. Earlier generations blamed faulty instruments. Then, geological interference. Late, our investigators blamed software corruption and sensor calibration failures. Yet every investigation reached the same conclusion. The transit events were internally consistent. Routes remained logical. Distances matched physical layouts. Sensor activations followed predictable sequences. Something genuinely appeared to be moving. The only problem was that the movement frequently occurred in places where movement should have been impossible. The deeper I searched, the stranger the history became. Entire engineering teams spent years investigating the phenomenon. Sensor networks were redesigned repeatedly. Tracking systems were replaced. Nothing changed. One infrastructure analyst summarized the problem in a report from 1969. The movement is not violating the tunnels. The tunnels are adjusting to the movement. The wording unsettled me because it sounded less like a technical finding and more like a warning. Then I found the convergence files. Not maintenance reports. Convergence files. The distinction mattered. Each folder documented an operator who became unusually interested in Array C. Different decades. Different backgrounds. Same progression. First came curiosity. Then route comparisons. Then future transit reports. Then, the personal destination appears inside the tracking records. Eventually, the operator stopped monitoring the route and started appearing inside it. Some documented sensor events are approaching their workstations. Others reported route maps terminating at locations connected to their lives. Every file ended with the same administrative notation. Status updated. Convergence confirmed. The phrase appeared repeatedly throughout 70 years of documentation. Not missing. Not terminated. Converged. The wording felt less procedural than ceremonial. The most disturbing discovery waited inside a locked cabinet labeled Transit Recordings. Hundreds of magnetic tapes filled the shelves. Maintenance communications. Sensor archives. Transit logs. At first, the recordings sounded ordinary. Inspection reports. Equipment diagnostics. Tunnel operations. Then patterns emerged. The same voices appeared across decades without aging. Operators held conversations with future versions of themselves. Some recordings referenced transit events before they occurred. Others discussed employees who had not yet been hired. Eventually, I found a tape carrying my employee identification number. The date stopped me immediately. The recording had been archived 9 years before I was born. My hands shook as I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged. My voice. Older. Exhausted. This is Ethan Cole confirming convergence sequence 37. I couldn't breathe. The recording continues. D describing sensor activity. Transit routes. Pressure systems. Everything matched the current facility conditions perfectly. The final statement haunted me. The route only accelerates when the destination notices it. The last discovery waited inside a weathered notebook hidden beneath the tapes. The journal belonged to Robert Vance's grandfather, one of the first tunnel engineers assigned to Black Ridge. The entries described decades of investigations into Array C geological studies, sensor analysis, route mapping. Every theory eventually failed. Near the end, the writing became increasingly desperate. Entire sections focused on a single conclusion. According to the journal, Array C wasn't tracking movement. It was tracking convergence. Every transit event represented 2 points becoming associated with one another. The more attention an operator gave the route, the more the route adjusted itself around them. Eventually, the tunnel network stopped treating the individual as an observer. It started treating them as a destination. The final page contained a sentence underlined repeatedly in black ink. The thing between the sensors is not moving toward you. It is moving the distance between you and it. Attached to the final entry was an active convergence register. Hundreds of names filled the document. Every operator who had investigated Array C. Near the bottom, I found mine. The status field beside it contained only 3 words. Convergence in progress. After finding my name inside the convergence register, I stopped thinking about Array C as a motion tracking system and started thinking about it as a process. That distinction changed everything. Every convergence file described the same progression. Curiosity, observation, correlation, convergence. Different operators used different terminology, but the pattern remained identical across 70 years of documentation. The moment someone became interested in the route became interested in them. Future transit reports appeared. Personal destinations emerged. Sensor events started carrying references to locations connected to their lives. Eventually, the operator stopped tracking the movement, and the movement started tracking the operator. Sitting alone in the archive beneath Black Ridge Mountain, I realized something even worse. None of the previous operators had solved the mystery. They had only documented stages of it. Every investigation ended abruptly. Every journal stopped mid-thought. Every convergence file concluded with administrative language that felt less like record-keeping and more like assimilation. I created my own rules that night. Never compare current routes with future transit reports. Never open a convergence file carrying my name. Never respond to a voice using my name on maintenance frequencies. Never track movement beyond tunnel marker 122. Most importantly, never acknowledge a route that ends somewhere personally significant. The final rule emerged naturally from the convergence files. Every operator who became fully associated eventually encountered routes terminating at locations connected to their lives. Childhood homes, former workplaces, hospitals, family properties, apartments. The details varied. The outcome remained consistent. Once the operator accepted the destination as meaningful, convergence accelerated dramatically. Transit reports multiplied. Radio anomalies intensified. Route correlations expanded. One tunnel supervisor from 1987 summarized the experience in a handwritten note. At first, the route follows the tunnel, he wrote. Then the tunnel follows the route. The sentence haunted me because it perfectly described the feeling growing beneath Black Ridge. Array C no longer felt like a sensor network. It felt aware of significance. For several nights, the rules appeared effective. The transit reports decreased. Convergence percentages stabilized. Array C stopped generating major route adjustments. The temporary calm lasted nearly a week. During that time, I almost convinced myself I had interrupted the convergence process somehow. The phenomenon still existed, certainly, but understanding it made it feel manageable. Predictable. Like the weather. Dangerous if ignored. Survivable if respected. Then I noticed the problem. The silence wasn't because the route had stopped approaching. The silence was because it no longer needed obvious anomalies to attract attention. Instead, the system began altering ordinary maintenance records. Inspection schedules referenced corridors that did not exist. Sensor diagnostics listed impossible tunnel markers. Pressure reports described airflow moving through sections of the mountain that had never been excavated. Array C no longer needs dramatic transit events. It was embedding itself into routine operations. The future reports became personal again after that. Not threatening. Intimate. The distinction mattered. Around 2:43 a.m., a transit report appeared automatically inside the archive system. The document carried my employee identification number and a timestamp dated 7 months into the future. Most of the report described ordinary tunnel activity. Airflow measurements. Maintenance inspections. Sensor diagnostics. Then I reached the final page. The destination section contained details no monitoring system should have possessed. The apartment where I lived after the tunnel collapse that ended my previous career. The motel where I stayed during the months of unemployment. The hospital corridor where I identified one of the workers who died. Every memory appeared catalogued like infrastructure. The report didn't describe emotions. It described endpoints. Coordinates. Convergences. As though the system viewed personal experiences the same way it viewed tunnel intersections. The final rule emerged during a monitoring update that never officially existed. At exactly 2:43 a.m., every monitor inside the control room refreshed simultaneously. Sensor feeds vanished. Airflow systems disappeared. Maintenance records collapsed. In their place appeared a single interface labeled Active Convergence Network. Hundreds of entries filled the screen. Some belonged to operators from the convergence files. Others carried names of engineers, inspectors, technicians, and maintenance workers listed throughout decades of facility history. Every entry included a status designation. Unobserved. Observed. Correlated. Converged. Then I found mine. Ethan Cole. Initial observation. Status. Complete. Ethan Cole. Route correlation. Status. Complete. Ethan Cole. Destination association. Status. Complete. For several seconds, I stared at the display without moving. Then another entry appeared beneath them. A new one. Created in real time while I watched. Ethan Cole. Final convergence. Status. In progress. At that exact moment, every transit archive inside the facility opened simultaneously. Not on one monitor. All of them. Thousands of routes fill every screen. And for the first time since arriving at Black Ridge, I realized the thing moving between the sensors was not traveling through the tunnels. The tunnels were being rearranged around whatever it was approaching. After realizing the tunnels were rearranging themselves around the route rather than the route moving through the tunnels, I stopped believing Array C was tracking motion at all. Movement was only the language it used. That distinction changed everything. For weeks, I had assumed the transit events were the anomaly. The impossible routes. The future reports. The destinations carry personal significance. Yet as I stared at thousands of route records filling every monitor inside the control room, a horrifying pattern emerged. The tunnels changed constantly. The routes changed constantly. The destinations changed constantly. The observers did not. Every transit report, every convergence file, every maintenance record revolved around the same thing: attention, observation, association. The system wasn't measuring movement through space. It was measuring the reduction of the distance between an observer and something being observed. Every operator who became interested in Array C eventually appeared inside its routes. The tunnels weren't leading anywhere. They were organizing people into destinations. Then the facility records changed. Not gradually. Instantly. Every employee's file inside the network is refreshed simultaneously. Work histories expanded. Performance reviews multiplied. Future assignments appeared decades ahead of schedule. According to the database, I had worked beneath Black Ridge Mountain for 38 years. Retirement paperwork existed. Transfer requests existed. Psychological evaluations existed. Future supervisors had already reviewed maintenance incidents I had not experienced yet. The system wasn't predicting my future anymore. It was documenting a version of reality where I never left the mountain. A version where convergence eventually completed. The radios were activated next. Not one frequency. All of them. Maintenance channels. Emergency networks. Inspection communications. Engineering frequencies. Every speaker inside the facility erupted with overlapping transmissions. At first, the voices sounded ordinary. Inspection reports. Pressure updates. Sensor diagnostics. Maintenance requests. Then I recognized the speakers. Every voice belonged to someone listed inside the convergence register. Operators spanning 7 decades of facility history. Some should have been retired. Others should have been dead. Yet they continued discussing routes, destinations, and convergence events as though their shifts had never ended. Nobody sounded frightened. Nobody sounded trapped. They sounded occupied, professional, focused. Like people performing a task that never concluded. The effect was more disturbing than panic could ever have been. Then I found Robert. Or rather, I found a version of Robert. One of the security monitors displayed him standing inside a control center that did not exist on any facility blueprint. The room stretched far beyond the dimensions of the actual complex. Rows of monitors disappeared into darkness. Thousands of route displays filled the walls. Different operators occupied different workstations. Different decades. Different uniforms. Different lives. All watching. All tracking convergence. Robert looked exactly as I remembered. Same weathered face. Same tired eyes. Same maintenance jacket. Yet something felt wrong. Permanent. Like a photograph that had forgotten it was supposed to represent a moment. Then Robert looked directly into the camera. Into me. And slowly shook his head. Not a warning. Not fear. Regret. The gesture unsettled me more than anything else because it suggested he remembered becoming part of the network. The final escalation began at exactly 2:43 a.m. Every transit archive is refreshed simultaneously. Thousands of routes fill every screen. Different years. Different tunnel layouts. Different destinations. For several seconds, the records displayed ordinary movement patterns. Then every destination name disappeared. Not deleted. Merged. Every route is updated in real time. Every corridor led toward Ethan Cole. Every tunnel led toward Ethan Cole. Every convergence point became Ethan Cole. The routes weren't documenting different destinations. They were documenting different paths toward the same observer. The horrifying scale of the system finally became clear. The convergence network wasn't a collection of tunnel routes. It was a structure built from associations. A map made entirely from versions of people who kept following the path. Then the wall behind the monitor array opened. Not on a screen. In reality. Concrete split apart with a deep mechanical groan. Beyond the opening stretched a tunnel descending into darkness beneath the mountain. Emergency lights illuminated empty walkways disappearing beyond visibility. Sensor arrays lined the walls. Each carried names instead of identification numbers. Memories. Regrets. Decisions. Locations from my own life. At the far end of the tunnel stood a control center larger than a city. Thousands of monitors glowed in the darkness. And standing nearest the entrance was another version of me. Older. Exhausted. Wearing a maintenance uniform faded by decades of use. He looked up slowly. Then held up a transit report. My transit report. The one marked Final Convergence in Progress. The older Ethan's expression darkened. Then he spoke for the first time. You still think it's coming toward you. Every radio inside the facility fell silent. The report in his hands opened by itself. And every monitor throughout Black Ridge displayed the same new status line. Destination has entered the route. For several seconds, I stood motionless at the entrance to the impossible tunnel while every monitor inside the control room displayed the same status line. Destination has entered the route. The older version of me remained standing beneath thousands of glowing transit records stretching into darkness. Around him, countless operators occupied workstations disappearing beyond visibility. Different decades. Different uniforms. Different lives. Yet every one of them appeared focused on the same task. Watching routes. Tracking destinations. Recording convergence. The deeper I looked into the vast underground facility, the more I realized what I was actually seeing. This wasn't a ventilation network. It wasn't a monitoring system. It was the final destination of the process hidden inside Array C. Every observer eventually arrived here. Not physically. Conceptually. Their attention became part of the route network they spent years investigating. Then I noticed something hidden inside the transit reports. Not the destinations. The structure. Every route followed the same pattern. Observation. Correlation. Association. Convergence. Different tunnels. Different operators. Different decades. Yet the sequence never changed. The routes weren't merely documenting movement. They were finishing it. Every operator file ended because a final convergence eventually existed. Every destination register concluded because a route was eventually completed. The system depended on completion. Certainty. Arrival. Suddenly, I remembered a sentence buried inside Robert Vance's grandfather's journal. The thing between the sensors is not moving toward you. It is moving the distance between you and it. For the first time, I understood what he had actually discovered. The routes didn't trap people. The routes required conclusions. The moment an observer accepted a final convergence, the process became permanent. So I refused to arrive. The reaction was immediate. I stepped forward, took the transit report from the older Ethan's hands, and tore it in half. Not symbolically. Literally. Paper scattered across the empty tunnel. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the older Ethan's face. Around us, the facility trembled. not violently. Confused. Like a machine encountering an impossible instruction. Thousands of route displays flickered simultaneously. Transit records opened and closed without a pattern. Destination markers vanished. Convergence percentages rewrote themselves. The operators scattered throughout the impossible control center slowly looked away from their monitors. The system wasn't collapsing because I had damaged a report. It was collapsing because I had interrupted the completion. Every route depended on a destination. Every convergence depended on an arrival. Without one, the network could not stabilize. The tunnels changed next. Corridors faded into darkness. Walkways dissolved. Sensor arrays became indistinct. Not disappearing. Becoming possibilities again. The older Ethan stared at the torn reports scattered across the floor. For the first time, he looked exhausted rather than resigned. Suddenly, I understood what he represented. Not a future version of me. A completed version. A finalized destination was preserved because the convergence network required closure. Every operator before me eventually accepted a route. Accepted a destination. Accepted convergence. The system survived by transforming observers into endpoints. The moment I refused completion, the structure holding those endpoints together began unraveling. The final act felt absurdly simple. I returned to the real control room and initiated a complete sensor network reconstruction. Not a system shutdown. Not a database deletion. A diagnostic recovery procedure designed to rebuild corrupted transit records. Thousands of Array C archives disappeared. Convergence registers erased themselves. Destination records collapsed. One by one, the completed routes vanished. The system fought back briefly. New transit reports are generated faster than they can be removed. Future convergence events attempted to recreate themselves. Impossible routes tried to reconnect. Yet uncertainty spread faster. Every deleted destination created an unanswered question. Every unanswered question weakened the framework holding the convergence network together. Then Black Ridge went silent. Not dark. Silent. The radios stopped. The transit reports stopped updating. The impossible tunnel beneath the mountain began slipping away like a dream losing coherence after waking. The last thing I saw before the monitors went black was the older Ethan standing alone beside an empty sensor array. He looked toward me one final time. Then gave a small nod. No approval. Not victory. Relief. And the convergence marked for my arrival ended before it could be completed. The official investigation lasted nearly a year. According to engineering auditors, Black Ridge experienced a widespread sensor network corruption event caused by decades of conflicting maintenance records interacting with obsolete monitoring software. Engineers reviewed motion arrays, airflow systems, transit archives. Every anomaly received a technical explanation. Every impossible route became a database artifact. Array C itself was removed from active service shortly afterward. Its designation disappeared from maintenance schedules. Its archives were deleted. Its installation history vanished. Nobody mentioned convergence registers. Nobody referenced future transit reports. Nobody discussed the impossible control center hidden beneath the mountain. As far as the final report concluded, Array C had never functioned differently from any other motion tracking system. It was simply a faulty sensor preserved by faulty records. The explanation sounded absurdly convenient. Yet nobody challenged it. Nobody wanted to. I resigned before the final review was completed. The decision wasn't difficult. For months, I had watched a monitoring system slowly transform routes into observers and destinations into people. Returning to ordinary maintenance work felt impossible afterward. I accepted a position managing industrial infrastructure several states away and left within weeks. New city, new apartment, new routines. Distance helped more than I expected. The radio anomalies stopped. The impossible transit reports disappeared. I no longer woke in the middle of the night expecting route maps describing destinations that shouldn't exist. Gradually, normal life returned. Not completely. Never completely. But enough that entire months passed without thinking about Black Ridge at all. Looking back, that period felt almost peaceful. The unfinished convergence remained exactly that. Unfinished. By refusing arrival, I believed I had interrupted whatever process the network required. Then the route diagrams started arriving. No return address. No postage. No identifying information. Just folded maintenance schematics appear inside my mailbox every few months. At first, they seemed ordinary. Tunnel blueprints. Ventilation layouts. Infrastructure diagrams. Different facilities. Different years. Different engineering firms. Then I noticed the pattern. Every schematic contained a corridor that wasn't supposed to exist. Sometimes it appeared as a maintenance passage. Sometimes as an unfinished excavation branch. Sometimes as a faint line extending beyond the edge of the blueprint. Whenever I checked official copies afterward, the corridor wasn't there. Yet every new diagram included another one. The routes weren't rebuilding themselves. They were keeping track. The realization arrived nearly 6 years later. I was reviewing infrastructure plans during a night shift when a facility modeling program generated a routing conflict. Nothing dramatic. Just a warning involving a maintenance corridor inside a project hundreds of miles away. Curious, I opened the details. The route looked ordinary at first. Junction points. Access shafts. Equipment rooms. Then I noticed the destination field. Blank. For several seconds, I assumed it was a software error. Then the file was updated. Not with a room number. Not with a tunnel designation. Not with a maintenance station. My name. The entry remained visible for less than a second before refreshing. When I searched for the route afterward, nothing remained. No routing conflict. No corridor. No system warning. Nothing. Yet I remember every detail. Most nights, I wake at exactly 2:43 a.m. without understanding why. Sometimes I hear distant machinery hidden beneath ordinary sounds. Air conditioning units. Elevator motors. Ventilation fans. Every once in a while, usually while reviewing engineering plans, I notice something strange. A corridor that seems longer than it should be. A maintenance route that wasn't there moments earlier. A destination field updates before I select it. The anomalies never remain long enough to prove anything. Yet one detail never changes. The feeling. The certainty. The sense that somewhere beyond the edges of every blueprint, the convergence network still exists. Waiting. Not for workers. Not for maintenance crews. For observers. And during those moments, I always remember the final sentence written inside Robert Vance's grandfather's journal. The line engineers spent 70 years trying unsuccessfully to understand. The route is not searching for you. It is searching for the version of you that eventually stops moving away. Sometimes, late at night, When a schematic refreshes unexpectedly or a corridor seems unfamiliar for just a second too long, I wonder whether the network truly disappeared, or whether it simply stopped being mapped. Because every so often, at exactly 2:43 a.m., a blank route appears inside whatever system I'm using. No starting point, no destination, no length. Just a progress indicator waiting at the bottom of the screen. And each year, the completion percentage seems slightly higher than before.